Well, everyone, the iPad 6th generation has been out for about 5 years now, so let's go and see exactly how this iPad is going to hold up and are holding up in 2023. Now, if you want to pick up some iPads, I probably would recommend more so than this thing. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad 6, we have to remember that when this iPad came out, there weren't really too many iPads that, were even decreasing in the bezel standpoint. I mean, we did have the 2018 iPad Pro that came out later on this year that completely changed what a lot of people's perspective on an iPad was. But in this specific case, there really wasn't too much else going for it. So definitely keep that in mind. Now, on the front of this iPad, we do have a 9.7-inch IPS LCD panel. Now, this is a fairly decent panel still. It's a fairly high resolution. So when I look at an iPad like this, I mean, that's still a very good resolution to have on this specific device. Now, is it perfect? No, it is missing a few things that we pretty much have nowadays. This thing does not have any sort of ProMotion or 120 Hz at all, no 90 Hz either. So that's kind of a disadvantage for this specific device. On top of that, you are kind of missing out on things like, the bezel-less design or the less bezel design that we have nowadays on our iPads. So that's kind of a disadvantage. Also, it still has like a home button on the front and all that other stuff. But I think overall, this is still a pretty decent looking iPad. And I think a lot of people are probably happy with the way this iPad's been holding up, at least on the front. It's definitely not the oldest looking thing in the world, but it definitely looks like an older iPad. Now, on top of that, we also do have a lightning port at the bottom, which is great. It does support Apple Pencil 1, which is amazing. Unfortunately, there's no Apple Pencil 2 support, but none of the base model iPads, which this one was at the time, support Apple Pencil 2. So it's kind of understandable a little bit. So that's kind of like another weird thing. But beyond that, it's kind of understandable what Apple is doing there. We also have a headphone jack on this iPad as well. And on top of that, we do also have our aluminum back. Now, the reason why I love the iPads in general is because they still feel so premium. You can pick up the first iPad, and you can compare it against the latest one, and it still feels so premium. It's very similar to like a MacBook in that standpoint. If you look at iPhones, even if you pick up the first iPhone, you pick up like the most recent iPhone, you can tell that there's a big difference. When you feel them in the hand, there's a big difference right there. With the iPad, 6th generation, it feels very similar to like the iPad 10, which kind of feels similar to an iPad Pro. So it's like still a lot of overlap there. Obviously, they aren't the same thing, but I do like how there's a lot of that, there's a lot of similarity there. The camera on the top left corner on the back of this iPad as well. And that kind of covers it up here. There's not a whole lot else that I kind of hate about this iPad. I think it holds up well. Some key things, like I said, Apple Pencil 1 support has a pretty decent display with high resolution, but it doesn't have, a ProMotion display, so you're kind of missing out on that standpoint as well. So in that situation, that kind of covers it up there. Now moving on to another area, which is the camera setup. So with this iPad, you are getting a single camera on the back. It's an 8 megapixel standard camera, and on the front, you are getting a 1.2 megapixel standard camera. So this thing definitely isn't, supposed to be competing with the iPhone 14 by any means at all. It came out in 2018, and it wasn't even supposed to be competing with the iPhone 10, which was, the same iPhone during that time. This iPad was pretty much competing with, I would say, maybe like an iPhone 6 camera, maybe like an iPhone 5S camera. Like, this is not that great of a camera at all, which is, again, expected. When you're getting in the baseline iPad, that thing is not going to be having that great of a camera, and that's completely understandable. You're kind of paying for what you get, and this is pretty much no exception. So with this type of iPad, you're pretty much getting a very standard type of, setup for the most part. If you want to film videos on it, I guess you can, but I probably would not recommend doing that. This is a very, very basic camera, and unless you're trying to go ahead and do something very basic, then I probably would not recommend using this camera at all. But if you're in a pinch, like if you're in like a study, like if you're in like a school and you're trying to like take pictures of your, lecture and you already have your iPad out, you could probably use it. But a majority of people already have a camera that's way better than their iPad in their pocket, which is their iPhone or, Android phone. And that would make a lot more sense than using something like this, in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there as well. Now, moving on to the software and the longevity portion of this iPad, you have to keep in mind that this iPad, it's still supported with software. It's not going anywhere right now, but I don't know how much longer this thing is going to last. And the reason I say that is because this thing did end up getting the same exact, chipset for the most part as the iPhone 7. Now, why is that important? Well, the iPhone 7 actually got discontinued with software. So that thing did not end up getting like the next version of iOS, which was so weird, but the iPad did. So I don't really understand what's going on there either. So if you were in a situation where you wanted to have this iPad last as long as possible, well, I don't know if this would necessarily be the first iPad I would go and recommend people to buy, because I don't know how much longer this iPad's going to last. Could it last another year? Possibly. It could go up to, iPad OS 17, the iPad 5 is still supported. But even at that point, I don't know if this one would be the one that would necessarily be the one I would recommend to buy, because I don't know how much longer it's going to last. If the iPhone is of its counterpart is already discontinued, it doesn't mean that this thing's going to be unsupported immediately, but also doesn't mean it's still going to be supported with software. So from that perspective, that I would say if you want to buy this iPad, go for it, but it's not going to be lasting that much longer, probably. So it's just kind of one of those things to keep in mind there as well. So that kind of covers it up there. Now moving on to the performance side of things. This iPad inside has that Apple A10 Fusion chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the one thing I will tell you about this iPad is that it was a good performing iPad when it first came out, but as iPads get older and older, clearly things don't really work out the same and things get worse, and that happens with every product out there. So with something like the iPad, 6th generation, I don't know if this iPad's going to be the one again that I would recommend people to buy, mostly because the performance is a little bit slower, but it actually still handles pretty much majority of things you would kind of throw at it. Like, it's not a slow iPad by any means. Like, this thing is still fairly fast, and for as old as it is, I think Apple does do a pretty good job at supporting these iPads for quite a bit of time with, software, but also giving them chipsets that kind of make them last, longer than they might end up lasting otherwise. So I think with this type of iPad, again, if you're trying to do basic things, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're trying to go and do super intensive things, like split screen multitasking between crazy applications, if you're trying to do super intense gaming or things like that, you will quickly find yourself getting in situations where things probably aren't working out that well. Things are bogged down and glitching and all this other stuff. That happens all of the time. So in a situation like that, that's kind of what I would say there. This type of iPad isn't really the first iPad I would recommend people to buy from that standpoint. But when I do look at this iPad and I do pretty much think about, hey, how much longer is this iPad going to last, and should people even buy it from the performance side, I will say, it's not a bad performing iPad for how old it is. But if you're trying to compare this thing against the latest iPad Pros, or even an iPad 10, this thing is definitely showing its age beyond those specific iPads. So in that kind of covers it up there as well. The good thing is, though, the battery life has always been pretty decent. I feel like iPads have pretty good battery lives overall. And with this one, it's a pretty big size battery, 8827 milliamp battery. It's not, small battery, and also, it doesn't really require that much power to run since it's a pretty basic iPad. I think this thing has this thing has a pretty decent power to, battery life, situation inside of it. So I think that's another thing going for this iPad as well. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is I definitely do think that the iPad 6th generation is a good iPad if you already have it. If you don't already have this iPad, though, you have to think about it. The iPad 9th generation is a very good iPad. That's just one generation old. You can get those things in the used market for very cheap. Even in the brand new market, I see them going on sale for $250 all the time. So I would recommend buying that iPad over this one. Go for the iPad 8, go for the iPad 7, and then go for the iPad 6 if you can't afford any of those ones. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.